That's Tommy Roe with his 1969 hit Dizzy, one of 22 chart hits Tommy recorded between 1962 and 1973. For me, Tommy's music has seemingly been around forever, not to make him sound like he's as old as Methuselah, but he's got some new music coming out and some upcoming shows, including one in New York City at B.B. King's on April 29th. Tommy, welcome to the show, and it's a great honor to speak with you because your music has been with me ever since I can remember hearing music.
Now we're talking about age.
Yeah, we are. The very first song that I ever knew the words to was Dizzy.
Oh, that's great. You know, it's funny. I get, at my concerts, I get a real cross-section, people that grew up with me in the 60s and people that were younger in the 50s, and now they're bringing their children to the shows. I mean, it's really kind of amazing when you think about it. It's covered several generations, it looks like.
Well, first of all, the songwriting is so great, your songwriting, and also the records were so well produced that they stand up, in any time period.
Well, I appreciate that. I had some great producers. Dizzy was produced by Steve Barry out here in California, and then, of course, my first number one, Sheila, was produced by Felton Jarvis, who, went on to produce Elvis towards the end of his career. And so I've worked with some really talented people and been very fortunate in that respect.
Now, you've probably told this story a million times, but as I understand it, Sheila was originally a song called Frida. Is that correct?
Right. Well, before I learned to play the guitar, I used to write these little silly poems when I was a kid, and when I was about 14, I wrote this poem about a girl I went to school with named Frida. And shortly after that, my dad taught me to play the guitar. Well, he taught me 3 chords, and I kind of whacked at the guitar. But that's when I got the idea of putting music to my little poems that I had written and see if I could, become a songwriter. And that's what started it all for me. I put 3 chords to Frida, which, we recorded it later on and we changed the title, but the song was originally called Sweet Little Frida. So, it started for me at a very young age.
Was it your idea to do kind of a little Buddy Holly tribute?
That was Felton's idea. But, when I was in high school, I actually recorded Sheila while I was still in high school, before the hit version.
Right.
And I recorded it with my band that we'd put together in high school, and it just had regular drums on it, and then when Felton heard the record, it was kind of, that first recording of Sheila was sort of a hit in the Southeast, so it got some airplay. And Felton remembered hearing it on the radio, and he wanted to re-record it, but he wanted to put the drums in it to catch the attention, So, and it worked because, Sheila was the B-side of my record. Save Your Kisses was the A-side, and they played it for a little bit and didn't go anywhere. And then a DJ in Baltimore flipped the record over and started playing Sheila. And it was, in the old days, we used to call it was a phoner. The phones lit up.
Right.
People were calling and requesting the record. So it was just kind of a fluke. It just all fell into place for me.
That's Sheila by Tommy Roe, our guest this hour. Not only was that a big song in the U.S., but also in Great Britain. In fact, the Beatles used to perform that in their sets.
They did at the Star Club.
Yeah.
In Germany, they used to perform Sheila live. In fact, there's kind of a crude recording of it out there in the bootleg world. I remember when I did the tour with the Beatles in 1963, or actually they did the tour with me. It was Chris Montez and I were headlining the tour. But the Beatles, when we first met, they approached me and said, we do your song on our show, and John said, we play it like this, but I think we're playing the chords wrong. And he took his guitar and played a few bars of it for me. I said, yeah, you've got it flipped. He was doing A-D-E instead of A-E-D. And I said, yeah, you're playing it backwards. Just flip it around and you'll have it. So
I think
those are good times.
I think they also did Chris's Let's Dance, too. I think that might have been one of the songs that they covered.
Well, in the early days when I toured with the Beatles in '63, prior to that, they were just really a cover band. I mean, they did Twist and Shout when they ended up recording Twist and Shout, but they did all the Chuck Berry stuff. You name it, any 50s rockabilly or Carl Perkins. They did, Blue Suede Shoes, They loved Long Tall Sally, Little Richard stuff. They did all of his stuff.
And I think you toured with them right when it was starting to break?
Right. Chris Montez and I were the headliners of the tour, and the Beatles were a featured act on our tour. And so it was during our tour that they really broke out. They released their first album during our tour. They had a release party in the middle of our tour up in, I think it was in Manchester. And so they released that first album during that tour. And so by the time we finished the tour, they were on their way. And they started getting a lot of airplay on Please Please Me and Love Me Do, those earlier hits they had out. And so during that tour, that was a springboard for them. Then after that, they just took off, And then when they came to the States to do the Ed Sullivan Show, they did a show down in Washington, D.C. at the Washington Coliseum. And their manager got together with mine and asked if I would open the show for them in Washington, D.C. This was about a year later. And, of course, I was more than happy to do it. And then I went on up to Washington and opened the show for them. I think it was in February of 1964.
Yeah, well, a little mutual admiration society. I think some of their music rubbed off. The song "Everybody" is sort of a Beatles influence tune, isn't it?
Yeah, I wrote "Everybody" after that tour in 1963. I took the Queen Elizabeth, the ship, back from England to New York City, and on that trip back on the ship, it was about 5 days crossing the Atlantic, and I wrote "Everybody," and I was very much influenced by what they were doing because, of course, the youngsters wouldn't know this, but in the early 60s, the music was totally different than the Beatles. I mean, you had Frankie Avalon, you had, kind of the teen idol thing going, and then the Beatles came into the States in the 1964, and they just changed all of that. They pushed all the American acts off the charts. And so I had to figure out a way to survive the charts, and that's kind of how I came up with the bubblegum thing, because this was a sound that nobody was doing, and I knew I couldn't compete with the British acts because they were flooding our market. So we put our heads together, and I started writing these soft rock songs, which ended up, the DJs ended up calling it bubblegum. And that's kind of how I survived the charts. I mean, I managed to have 6 top 10 records in the 60s, which was pretty fortunate because a lot of the American artists were not having any hits.
Yeah, you survived all those changes that were happening there. You sort of on the surface of the water, as the waves were coming by.
Yeah, and a lot of that I have to say because of my songwriting. I mean, if I hadn't been able to write those songs, I certainly wouldn't have found the songs somewhere else. So the songwriting thing was really my secret weapon, I guess you would say, because, I intentionally created those songs, kind of created a character for myself.
Tell me about the studio musicians who played on your records, because I know Hal Blaine was one of them.
Yeah, Hal came later on in my career, but in the beginning when I cut Sheila, I was living in Atlanta. I grew up in Atlanta, and we drove up to Nashville and recorded in the old RCA Studio B where Elvis recorded. That's where I cut Sheila. And, of course, we had Buddy Harmon on drums, who was an incredible drummer. Bob Moore on bass. He had a record called Mexico. Jerry Reed played guitar, and Wayne Moss played the real fast rhythm guitar. And then actually on Sheila, there's a piano part on there. You can't hear it, but it's Floyd Kramer playing on that part. So, great musicians, no doubt about it. And then when I cut in Muscle Shoals, I had Jerry Carrigan on drums, Norbert Putnam on bass, David Briggs on keyboards, and I brought my guitar player over from Atlanta, Bobby West, who played guitar on Carol. I did a cover version of Chuck Berry's Carol, and my old original guitar player is playing the lead part on that. And then I moved to New York, and from New York I moved out to Los Angeles, and that's when I started recording with the L.A. musicians, and that's when I hooked up with what the so-called Wrecking Crew, Hal Blaine and Joe Osborne, Larry Knechtel, Don Randy, Ben Benet, all those guys. And great musicians. They played on practically every hit that came out of L.A. in the 60s. It was just amazing. Their repertoire is just amazing.
Now, I have to ask you, in the late 60s when the Archies were popular, did you ever hear one of their records on the radio and think to yourself, this guy sounds a heck of a lot like me?
Well, they were copying me. There's no doubt about it. the DJs loved my records, but they loved to kid me about it too. They used to call me the king of bubblegum. And so the Archies came after that, and then they're all fighting to become the king of bubblegum. Right. It's a pretty amazing thing. But the Archies had Sugar Sugar, and you had Yummy Yummy from, I think, Ohio Express, several other groups that put out some bubblegum records that did quite well. They were all big hits, and so occasionally I'll do some of those songs in my show. I love those songs. They're a lot of fun to do.
Well, it's funny because maybe 20 years ago or 30 years ago, people might have said, oh, bubblegum, with maybe a little bit of disdain. Now it's the opposite. Now you want to wear it with like a badge of honor.
Well, when they first started, they were digging me. The DJs were digging me, and I took it personally, because I managed to create that style because I did it intentionally. Like I said earlier, I was trying to create something so different that I could get some airplay on the radio. So they were taking digs at me, and I took it personally. But after a little bit of that, I said, what's wrong with bubblegum music? It makes everybody happy. They love to dance to it. Every time I sing Sweet Pea, a big smile comes on everybody's face. There can't be a lot wrong with that. So I just took it in stride later on in my career.
By the way, I want to mention that you have some shows coming up. The big one here in the New York City area, the 29th at B.B. King's.
Right, B.B. King's the 29th. That's on a Monday, I believe it is. The 2 days before that, the 27th, I'm at Ram's Head on stage down in Annapolis, Maryland. And then we leave New York on the 30th, and I go down to Orlando, and I'm at Disney World for 3 days starting the 3rd of May. So 3, 4, and 5 of May, I'll be at Disney World at Epcot Center. But I'm looking forward to B.B. King's. I love B.B. I've known him for years and years, and I understand his club is just doing great. So I'm really looking forward to the New York City area up there and getting to see my fans in the New York City area.
And even better, you've got some new music to play at these shows.
I do, yeah. Songwriting is a strange thing with me. It comes in spurts. It's not like something I do continuously. And this past 2 years, I've been writing a lot of songs, and so I have to just churn them out when I get that inspiration to write. And I churned out a bunch of new songs, and I thought, I haven't recorded in so long. I think the last CD I had out was in the mid-'90s. And so I decided to go in the studio and record these new songs, and we put this CD together called Devil's Soul Pile. And Devil's Soul Pile is one of the tracks on it. It's a song that I wrote. And it actually went to number one in the independent charts, the New Music Weekly charts. It was a number one adult contemporary song this past year. And so I've got that song to do, and I've got several from the CD that I do in the show.
I was going to say, when I heard Devil's Soul Pile, we're going to play that in just a bit. When I heard that song, I thought to myself, thank goodness, whatever you're doing to keep your voice in shape and everything, because you sound pretty much the same there. I don't know what your secret is.
I've always had this kind of a high voice, In fact, in the early days when I cut Sheila and all those Sweet Pea and all those records, they used to speed my records up to make the voice sound even higher, I've had that style, and with this new music that I'm writing, it still seems to hold up the same. It's just amazing to me, too. I'll be 71 years old in May, this coming May, and I still feel like I'm a 71-year-old guy with a 35-year-old brain. So.
Yeah, and a 25-year-old voice when I heard it.
Right, so I managed to make it work somehow.
I have to ask you, because you've been in the music business for so long, and you've seen the changes that have happened in the music industry, and probably the biggest change in the past, I guess over the past 20 years, is sort of the end of the music industry. What do you think about that? The way
it's sad in a way because I can relate to it because I know the difference. But the kids today don't know how it used to be, so they don't really. All they have is what we talk about. But I saw this coming in the '90s with the technology. The technology was changing so drastically. You could record at home in the '90s if you had just a little simple recorder, you could make a legitimate record at home, even as early as the mid-'90s. So I saw this happening, and I started calling the technology the star, and I think that's where we're at now.
Yeah.
Technology now the star. And the musicians and the entertainers are just part of underneath that, There's so many of them, and there's so much music. I call it music by the pound, because there's just so much of it, And it's hard to get exposure to your music. But the good thing about it is that the young kids can do their own music at home. I mean, I recorded some of my new CD at home. So, I mean, you can do it at home, and you can put it up on the Internet yourself. You don't need a record label. The record labels are just obsolete. The only thing that's making the record labels sustain themselves or exist is their catalog. If they didn't have a catalog, they would be useless. You wouldn't need them.
Well, Tommy, it has been great talking to you, and I want to remind the listeners again, the 27th, actually the 29th, you're at BB King's.
Yeah, the 29th, I'm at BB King's on 42nd Street, West 42nd Street, New York City. The 27th, I'm at Ram's Head on stage in Annapolis, Maryland, and then I'm at Disney World May 3, 4, and 5 at Epcot Center. Any fans that are out there that want a little dose of bubblegum, come out and see me. We have a good time. It's a fun show. I get to talk with the crowd a little bit. I do a part of my show where I do a Q&A session.
Oh, wow.
And I get asked a lot of interesting questions from the audience, and that's always a lot of fun. So I look forward to seeing everybody in New York City at BB King's.
That would be great. And Devil's Soul Pile is the name of the new record, and people can get that on your website.
That's right, TommyRoe.com. You can find out my schedule as far as my dates go, and you can find out all about my new music, and, of course, the old music speaks for itself.
Yeah, it sure does. Thanks so much, Tommy, for joining us today. I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.